it is safe to say that UK politics has been having a moment since Brexit. It's not a moment, it's a decade at this point, where there's just been endless instability and chaos. And amongst that chaos, we've seen the rise of Reform UK, a far-right populist Trump wannabe party that is currently surging in the polls and looks like it is destined to win the next general election. But what we've just had in the United Kingdom is a by-election that seems to have painted the perfect picture in how to stop reform when it matters. So for those of you that aren't aware, in the United Kingdom, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have devolved parliaments, basically like our equivalent of state parliaments at a lower level for more local issues. And there was a by-election in the Welsh seat of Caerphilly, which basically maps to the nationwide seat of Caerphilly in the UK House of Commons. And that is essentially the most die-hard Labour area in all of Wales. We're talking about a place where on a federal level, they have not lost the seat since 1918. So Labour going into this by-election was a little bit worried that the polling would pan out and that this would be a historic defeat for them and a possible monumental victory for reform. So this by-election was brought about by the death of the sitting Labour member in the Welsh Parliament for this constituency. And to give you a sense of how safe this is relatively for Labour, these were the election results back in 2021. Labour had done pretty well for itself, winning almost half of the vote, and the Tories, Conservatives that is, weren't even really an element here. The main form of opposition to Labour is the Green there, Plaid Cymru, which is the Party of Wales, a centre-left Welsh nationalist party. So that gives you a sense of what this seat is. Traditionally, upwards of 60% of people here are voting for either Labour or another centre-left party. It's not somewhere that's traditionally competitive. But going into this by-election, things seemed very different. If you haven't heard about it too much, go back and look at my videos. I've done a whole video on why Labour UK is collapsing. But I think the easiest way to explain it is that the Labour Party has made a move to the centre, to almost the right, to try and broaden its appeal. But that's kind of had a massive backlash effect in that they have disaffected most of their left-wing base. And they've also failed to deliver on a lot of promises of actual reform to the country, which has alienated centrists and centre-right people. So they're kind of in this Goldilocks zone where they've kind of alienated every type of voter in the country that they could win, and things were not looking good for them going into this. In the one poll that was released for this by-election, it had Labour not even cracking 13%. They were down at 12, not even making the teens. And in terms of the actual competition for the seat, you had Reform all the way ahead on 42, and then Plaid Cymru at around 38, up in the high 30s. So it looked like this was going to be an election in which Reform proved that it could win in traditionally left-wing heartland, and that Labour would suffer a monumentally embarrassing defeat, thus adding to this legitimacy that Reform has been seeking, that it is the real alternative to Labour and the Tories to become this new dominating force in British politics. But then the election actually happened, and it was very interesting to say the least. First of all, turnout was way higher than expected. At the last parliamentary elections for the Welsh Parliament, the turnout in Caerphilly was only about 44%. In this by-election, it was upwards of 50%. Upwards of 50% turnout for a by-election, probably due in part because Reform was taking up so much media attention claiming that they were destined to win this seat. But for whatever reason, turnout was incredibly high. So look, I'm going to throw up the 2021 results again. That is what it looked like last time politics was normal in Wales. But the result of this by-election looks like this. A monumental shattering of traditional politics in Wales. So again, by the standards of Welsh politics, this was a high turnout election, and this was the result we got. This isn't the result of disaffected people just leaving politics and then having some really funky result taking over. This is the people of Wales turning out and supporting the one left-wing option that they saw that could actually stand a chance of beating Reform. And it worked. So let's actually look at the results. Plaid won by over 11 points, beating Reform back there a relatively distant second on 36%. And it seems that Plaid has gotten to that point basically by absorbing most of the Labour vote. Labour suffered almost a 35-point swing against it as its voters went either to Reform or most of them to Plaid. For the traditional Tories, the Conservatives, things are beyond apocalyptic. In a by-election where upwards of 33,000 people voted, they didn't even get 700 votes, and they're stuck there on 2%. I believe that's also a 15-point swing against them, to give you a sense of how bad this is. So the two traditional major parties, even though the Tories aren't that competitive here, if you put the Conservatives and Labour together, they've suffered like a 50-point drop in their vote share here. So what makes this actually so important, beyond the fact that they've basically blown up traditional politics and a Labour versus Plaid seat is now a Plaid versus Reform seat? Let's try and get our heads around that at first. But the reason this matters is it shows you that there is a coalition that is capable of beating Reform. And it comes down to one of the... It sucks because this is just a reality in first past the post voting, but you have to appreciate when you see it, and that is effective tactical voting. Tactical voting in a first past the post system basically refers to any instance where instead of backing the candidate or party that you like, you back the one that you think has the best chance of winning the seat to potentially beat the party you don't like. So if you're a Greens voter or a Lib Dem voter in the UK, you might vote Labour instead, just to try and keep the Tories out. And what we're seeing here is kind of a reversal, where traditionally people from smaller parties would suck it up and vote for Labour. It's completely flipped itself on its head here. The situation now is, if you want to stop Reform and pick a left-wing option, what you're going to have to do is suck it up, don't vote for Labour, and vote for the most viable left-wing candidate there. Because people don't want Reform, and if there's a unified left-wing option, this shows they'll pick it. I think this is a wake-up call to the British people, for them to realise that if they don't like Reform, if the 60 to 70% of people that don't want to vote for Reform actually put their heads together, there is an ability to resist the rise of the party. It just takes a matter of tactical voting and actual cooperation. Because here's the thing, if the other left-wing parties, that being the Greens and Lib Dems, who I think together got like 3% of the vote here, not even really worth looking at, and the Labour Party had like swallowed their pride, accepted that Plaid was kind of the only option to win here other than Reform, and just endorsed Plaid, then this would have been an overwhelming landslide win for Plaid Cymru, which it kind of was, but to an even greater extent. And that is something that can be repeated around the country. Because, look, the election is years away, and the dynamics of the race, of course, are going to change. But looking at the situation now, is if you want a path to victory, it's emulating what happened here. If Labour wants to do anything in its power to keep Reform out, and is willing to make sacrifices, I know that's a big if, but if they're willing to make sacrifices, it would be working with the Lib Dems on a national level, the Greens on a national level, Plaid in Wales, and the SNP in Scotland, for some sort of multi-party agreement where they say whoever has the best chance of beating Reform in whatever constituency you're in, that is the candidate that we all support. Look, most of my viewership is from Australia, so I'm sure pretty much all of you guys agree that first past the post is a terrible voting system. But when it's kind of inevitable, like it is in the UK at the moment, you have to accept that when people are well informed enough and smart people put in the effort, they can make a result like this happen. So the Labour Party has to ask itself, what is the best path forward for the United Kingdom? Is it trying to save the Labour Party, or is it swallowing some pride and accepting that you're going to have to work with and give up seats to partners who could actually help you stopping Reform?